Hey folks, my name's Ed Trevors. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm an Anglican priest serving in the beautiful parish of St. Margaret of Scotland that sits on the ancestral and on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Gwe. Recently I was watching CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network, I think that's what it's short for. Anyway, I was reading their webpage, and a couple of guys, a couple of correspondents, I don't know, reporter, they were talking about a new bill here in Canada, Bill C-367. Now, Bill 367 makes amendments to Bill C-319. Those numbers aren't supposed to mean anything to you, except Bill 319 was a bill that, a law that was passed a few years ago that prohibited hate speech. And Bill 367, C-367, amends Bill C-319 by removing a clause, removing an exemption for religious organizations. So there was a defense that religious organizations could take up if they were charged for a hate crime, and they could say, nope, can't charge us because we're a religious organization, and so what we're saying comes from our faith. So you can't charge us because it's part of our faith. Because here in Canada, we have the right to our religion, so long as our religion doesn't impede upon another person's rights. Anyhow, so these guys on CBN, they were going on that this is an attack against Christianity. This is an attack against Christianity. This is an attack against. It's just another example of how the West is learning how to attack Christianity and take away our rights. Okay, so I read the bill. I read Bill 367, C-367, and it's very simple. It says we're removing this and we're removing that from Bill C-319. And so I had to go back and read Bill C-319. And what I found in C-319, I swear, Canadian bills, what I found in Bill C-319, the law against hate speech, was, it says everyone who incites hate against an identifiable group. That's really the crux of it, okay? You can be charged with a hate crime if you incite hate against an identifiable group. It's much more complicated than that, but that's the gist. And so I thought, okay, well, let's be careful with this, Ed. What does it mean? What does it mean when we say hate? What does it mean when we say hate? And so I did a little more searching, and I came across two really amazing insights that helped me understand what the federal government means by hate. And the first came from Parliament itself, and the content of a communication that expresses detestation or vilification of an individual or group of individuals on the basis of prohibited grounds of discrimination. So here in Canada, there are certain things you cannot discriminate somebody for. And if you are offering content, some form of communication that expresses detestation or vilification of one of the groups that we're not allowed to discriminate somebody for, then that's what hate communication means. And so I did a little more digging, and I found something from BC. And this says any kind of like abusive comment or pictorial representation that, when taken in context, tends to or is likely to expose an individual or group or class of individuals to hatred or contempt. So if you do those two things, you're going to get in trouble here in Canada. Okay, if you do either of those two things, if you offer content that's going to lead to a particular group or group of individuals or class or other sort of identifiable social group, if you offer any kind of content that is going to lead to their detestation or vilification, no good. And if you do something that tends to or is likely to lead to those groups being exposed to hate or contempt, it's no good. Those are the things you can't do. Okay? So when I hear these Christians talk about how it's an awful thing that those hate laws are those, excuse me, the Bill C-319, the law against hate speech, is being stripped of the religious exemptions. Well, it makes me really a little bit furious, because what they're saying in essence is, if you take away my exemption, I won't be able to behave in these detestable ways anymore. And that's not acceptable. Now, we're not talking about a religious right that if we don't perform it, then we won't be able to communicate effectively with our God. We won't be able to worship effectively. We won't be able to lead the kind of lives that our religion requires us to lead. There's nothing in this bill that says, as you know, Christians must not go love people anymore, or help people anymore, or provide for people anymore. We must not forgive or act charitably. We must not be merciful or seek justice. Nothing like that. No, it's saying that you can't go out and say things that tend to or are likely to expose an individual or a group of people to hatred or contempt. That shouldn't even faze us. Like, again, as I read the law, because, you know, I don't know, maybe this is some kind of weird secular attack on Christianity, but as I read the law, I'm like, man, when would I ever say anything that will tend to or is likely to expose a group of individuals to hatred or contempt? Why would I ever say anything like that? Why would I ever say something that would lead to a public conversation about how much we detest or that we've vilified a particular identifiable group within our society? When did Jesus ever do that in the four Gospels that we have and the book of Acts? I mean, he's mentioned in the book of Acts too. When in those 5 books? Well, let's bring in Revelation as well, shall we? Because he's mentioned in Revelation. So in those 6 books, when does Jesus ever speak in a way? When does he ever take on the method, this methodology that I am going to make the world hate you for who you are because I love you so much and I want you to change? When does he ever do that? Never. Ever. Never. So to hear Christians say, oh dear Lord, the Canadian government is removing our God-given exemption from being horrible individuals. It should never have been there in the first place. It should never have been there in the first place. This is not who Christians are supposed to be. Christians are not supposed to have a tool in the tool belt that they whip out when they want to destroy someone or some group of identifiable individuals. It's just not supposed to be a part of our makeup. Now, I know the argument will be, yes, but we have a right to speak out against sin. Nobody's taking your right to speak out against sin. Nobody's taking that away. You can do that without pointing at another group of people and saying they are detestable, they are the villain, they are the enemy, they are out to eat your children, they are out to do horrible things. You can speak out against sin in your church. You can teach your congregation to fight the temptations that they will feel to commit sins. And you can do that in a way that does not require you to vilify, to ostracize, to estrange, to endanger a group of people. Now, recently, and there's another video coming out on this guy anyway, but recently there was a video I caught on YouTube. I want to say it was TYT. And they were talking about this pastor in, I want to say he's Oregon, I believe. And he was talking about how he perceives homosexuality to be a sin. And he's talking to his congregation. Now he's on video, but he's talking to his congregation. And what he says, and this is a really good example of what not to do. What he says is, because of what it says in Romans chapter 1, which is a completely gross misreading of Romans chapter 1, he should have his pastor's license revoked just for that. Not that they have pastor's license. Anyway, he says, because of what it says in Romans chapter 1, every homosexual should be given a fair trial. Well, that's nice. And then convicted, sentenced to death, and have a bullet put in the back of their head. Okay, so what he's done there is not preach against sin. What he's done there is he's preached against a demographic of the population who lives in a way that he considers to be sinful. That's not the same as preaching against sin. That is inciting hate. And you can hear it because his congregation jumps up and says, yeah, that's right. Okay? He would be in violation of Canada's hate laws, anti-hate laws, because he's vilifying a group of people. He's helping his congregation come to an understanding that we must despise these people. We can, as Christians, we can speak out about all kinds of things. We can speak out about all kinds of behaviors. We can stand up and say, this is not acceptable. This is not okay. This is not appropriate. This is not helpful. This is sinful. And we can do that in a way that does not lead us, that does not require us to point our fingers at groups within our society that would, in such a way, that would lead to their vilification, that would lead to hatred and contempt would lead to them being exposed to hatred and contempt. Christians are supposed to speak up. We're supposed to speak up and say, we need to do better. I mean, really, it's just me, but for a Christian speaking up into society, the call should be, let us do better. But Christ, in no point that I can remember, ever relies on hate speech to proclaim his message. At no point that I can remember in the Gospels or in Acts or in Revelation does Christ ever rely on hate speech, on the destruction of an identifiable group within his society as his preferred way of sharing the message that we can be better, that we can live better, that we can do better, and that we must. Hate speech is not a tool that is supposed to be in the Christian belt. And if you find that tool in your particular bag of tricks, if you find hate speech as is one of your many ways of sharing your message, a full review of your message is necessary. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord's face be made to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord's countenance be lifted up to you. May you always know the peace of being in the Lord's presence. And I pray, if you ain't got something nice to say, don't say nothing at all. Let your words encourage people, empower people. Let your words build people up. And let your words be the cornerstones that a better world is built upon. Let your words always be of love. Amen. Nemultus.